Mark 1. Conversations at the speed of sound.
We were flying out to Bangor's fly-in out at Clifton. It was a farm fly-in that they had every year. And we were out near Gatton, and there was an almighty bang, and Graham very calmly said, "We've just lost the prop." Instant glider. You always wonder how well a plane will glide. Well, we found out the hard way.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Mach 1, the podcast of the Queensland Air Museum, Caloundra. My name is Gary Hills, I'm a QAM volunteer, and I'll be your host for this episode. Now, you just heard the voice of Mrs. Sue Schott, who spoke to me recently about her late husband Graham's project to build and fly his Rand Robinson KR2. That's a great conversation, and that's coming up in just a moment. But I wanted to let you know about next week's episode, all about the Dassault Mirage, which became, for Australia, of course, the GAF Mirage. We're going to talk to RAAF Air Vice Marshal retired and QAM volunteer and guide Dave Dunlop about the beginnings, the design and the role of the Mirage, why Australia bought the Mirage 3, and then we're going to drill down and just look at a little bit of the history of our Mirage A316 and its service life. And Dave's going to talk about what it was like to fly Mirages, and he might even just mention, if you heard last week's episode, you may find this a connection. He's going to mention the exercises that RAAF pilots had with RAF pilots putting up their Mirages against the Hawker Hunters. So that's coming up next week. But for now, this is Sue Schott. So I'm sitting in Hangar 2 at the Queensland Air Museum with Mrs. Sue Schott. Hello, Sue.
Hi, Gary.
Thank you for this. I've been looking forward to this because this is a story that not very many people perhaps get a chance to hear, and it's just such a great piece of Australia's aviation heritage and of local aviation heritage here as well. So let's start with you. Where are you from, and do you have a background in aviation?
I'm originally from Bell, out near Dalby in Queensland, and no, I have no background in aviation.
You're like many of us, you know about aviation by being a passenger, is that right? But I think your late husband, Graham, had a very extensive background in aviation. What was his story? Well,
he just loved the idea of flying from when he was a little boy. He said, he used to say, you know, he'd lie down and see the clouds and think, oh, that'd be great to be amongst the clouds. And he wasn't from a background of flying or anything like that. But after senior, he did join the Air Force Academy, and he did 2 years there. Did a little bit of flying in that. But in his second year, he was made entertainments officer, which apparently he was good at. But from a kid who'd been in boarding schools and so forth and on the farm, that was a whole new world. And his studies, which he'd never had problems with, I mean, you know, he was a kid who'd got 10 A's for junior and things like that. He failed uni, and so he failed out of the Air Force, and the warden there suggested he go teaching, and which he did.
So just before you go on, what era was that? What years was he in the Air Force?
The Air Force would have been 64 to 65.
Okay, so he would have been on jets by that time, by the time he left, or had he just been beginning?
No, they really just gave them a taste of flying, I think. I think they were Mackies, in that time, yeah.
So he leaves the Air Force, goes into teaching?
Yes, he did a year of teaching, and his first school just happened to be Bell. and that's where we met. And because he didn't have a family to go home to every weekend like everybody did, he was estranged from his stepfather, and his mother had died when he was in senior. He spent the weekends in Bell, and that's when he started flying in Dalby. And in fact, I did do a couple of joy flights with him before the first one was really before we started dating, and I think might have been set up by my sister's then boyfriend, who he was friendly with, and it wasn't a great time. I got a little bit seedy that time too, and while she was up in the air with him, I got attacked by a magpie.
A very auspicious beginning to a relationship, which then you were together all of your lives, weren't you?
Yes, I mean, we in '68 he got his. Well, he always says he got his pilot's licence, his ham radio licence, and his marriage licence all in the same year. But then, as we were pretty broke after that, and he didn't pursue flying for many years after that. And
so, did he stay as a school teacher?
Yes. He eventually in '69 he was transferred to Brisbane because he'd done as much uni externally as he could, and he finished his degree and taught initially at Everton Park and then at the Gap.
Now, what was he teaching?
Science and maths.
Wow.
And he was a very bright boy, and in later years he taught adults who came back to do their senior, and they did external exams like we did when we were at school. The normal high school had gone to school-based assessments, but his students all did external exams.
So did he teach right through to retirement age?
Yes. Yeah. Well,
what year did he retire?
He took early retirement, actually.
Well, somewhere along the way, he got the idea that he wanted to build his own aeroplane, and I think you began that process in around '92, is that right?
Yes, that's right, because it took him 6.5 years, and it got going in '98. So, yes.
Well, so had he been doing much flying throughout his life as well, just recreationally?
I used to say, I'll give you an hour's flying for Father's Day. And at one stage I said, you better come and cash in those hours because we'll never be able to afford to do it otherwise. And our son, who was born in '71, so he was about 15, I suppose. He decided we had the holiday. Well, Dad had the holiday house up here, and so
on the Sunshine Coast.
The Sunshine Coast, and at Caloundra, and so school holidays. He thought, I'll go flying at Caloundra, and that's. Yeah,
but he did have a long relationship, didn't he, with the Caloundra Aero Club? He was president at some point, wasn't he?
He was president for a number of years, right up until he got sick.
Okay, so aviation was still in his blood. He wanted to be a bird all of his life, and so you must have had a conversation about this idea of a project to build his own kit aeroplane. How did that come about?
Well, he was actually going to buy. He'd been for a flight in a drifter because a friend I was talking about before, one of his ex-students, had started learning to fly, and he was flying a drifter, and Graham had gone flying with him, and he thought, maybe I'll get a drifter. And around that time, my father died. So that was '87. My father died. And of course, ultralights didn't have a great reputation. And I said, look, if you're going to fly, get a proper aeroplane, because I don't think I could handle something happening to you so soon after something happening to losing my father. So he started investigating, and by this stage he was involved with the Sports Aircraft Association. They'd come up here and had a sun and fun day up here, and he thought, oh yeah, that was good. And so he started investigating different types of home-built aeroplanes, and thought that was what he could afford.
And he settled on the Rand Robinson, and we have that very aircraft here now on display at the museum because you both very kindly donated that to us. Let's talk about this. So this is being built under your house in Brisbane, is that right? How was that?
Well, my sister still says she lost her car space when she used to come to visit. Yeah, it was interesting. Very interesting, actually. But it was very handy to be able to he'd come home from work and just go down and do a little bit, and I'd go down and hold this or hold that or whatever.
So for our listeners, it's a Rand Robinson KR2, which is the two-seater, and I think you named it the Beast. But its registration is Xtra Sierra. Is there something significant about XXS?
Well, I actually got the call sign because he went into town in Brisbane to get a registration, all that sort of thing, and he was hoping to get GTS or because that was his initials, or KR something. And he came home and he said, oh, look, I couldn't get anything like this. But so I chose this, which I can't remember. But this is the list that I could choose. And I looked at it and I said, well, XXS, that's extra small in women's clothing. That seems appropriate to me. And
perfect.
So he went back and he changed it, and we're very pleased that he did because it was known far and wide as extra small. And
and it is tiny, let's face it. I've seen photographs of two people very squeezed up inside there, but not uncomfortable, I guess. How was it sitting side by side in this tiny little cockpit?
No, we had plenty of space, really, and we actually camped out of it in various places, but you had to be very judicious with your packing and things. For instance, I had a seat back that was not the normal seat back that's in there now, but it was one that was used when we were camping, and it was hollow, which I used to fill up with clothing. That was my luggage, and we'd sit on the tent and the sleeping bag, and I'd made some hollow tubes, and they'd be filled up with chrome singlets and so forth, and go up the wings, because there was a little space within the wings that they could do that, and that led to some funny comments. I can remember one time we were down at Narromine, and we had the tent set up beside it, and I'd gone in to have a little bit of a rest in the afternoon, and people wandering around looking at the aircraft around there, and I heard these comments, gee, those wooden seats, they'd be uncomfortable, and other people saying, well, they must have taken the seats out too because they're worried about the sun on them or something.
And I think you and Graham travelled far and wide in the Beast, didn't you?
Well, we did. We went down as far as we flew over the Great Ocean Road. We went down to Avalon Air Show one year, and then across to Warrnambool, and that coincided with when the I think it might have been the Formula One had been in Adelaide, and we had one of the jets coming towards us, and oh yes, we've got the lighty, we're talking. But it was quite interesting because we could see all these people on the Great Ocean Road at the viewpoints, and they were obviously taking photos of us as well. And so that far south, our first, we used to go up to Raglan. There was an air show up at Raglan, a farm up there, which every year, and that was our first actually big flight. In fact, he had to get special permission to take me as an observer, not as a passenger, because he was within the first 50 hours of him flying. And we flew right up over the tip of Queensland on another trip.
It's an amazing little airplane. I mean, it was quite fast, wasn't it? And it was very light, but powered by a very small engine. I think most Rand Robinsons had a Volkswagen engine, but Graham chose a Continental. Was there a story behind that?
It was just that it was a proper aeroplane engine, I think, and he liked that idea. When we bought it as an abandoned project, and it came with a Volkswagen engine, which actually he sold to somebody who was going to put it into a gyrocopter. Yeah.
Well, over 300 kilometres an hour, I believe, was its top speed.
Yeah, it went fast enough.
And so, as a kit project which had already been started and he completed, you say it took 6.5 years to complete. I believe it's all wood construction with fiberglass and foam and so on, so it's designed to be registered as an experimental craft as well under that category.
Well, in those early days it was before experimental when we first started it, so it was built under the regulations of the sports aircraft. I can't remember what that was called before experimental, but he had to have an inspection by a wood man and a plastics man, which was what they call the fiberglass. But yes, the guy who started the project was actually a builder, so all the woodwork was done and it was done very well. Graham didn't like the fiberglass that he had done, so he started the fiberglassing from scratch, and that was done over like a green foam.
Did he enjoy building it?
Yes, I think towards the end he got a bit impatient that, there's a bit of a saying with the home builders, 95% done, 95% to go. I think it was something like that. But
well, he did finish it, and in '98, I think you say, he took his first flight.
Yes.
And that must have been a big day for everyone.
It was a big day. We'd taken it out to Archerfield because we were still living in Brisbane at the time, and it had gone out on the back of the truck, and then of course we had to reassemble the wings because the wings came bolted off. And he'd organised for Barry Hempel to do the test flying, and Barry, who he was a bit in awe of, for those who don't know Barry, he did aerobatics and he had flying school and all of that sort of thing, and he did a lot of performance stuff, and so Graham was in a bit of awe of him, and he sort of said, "Oh, KR2, I don't like KR2s, and it's got a tricycle gear and you've got a handheld radio. I don't like handheld radios." Anyway, he took it for his first flight, and it failed the braking because the brakes were really designed for the
not for the tricycle.
He'd got Bill Whitney, who was an aeronautical engineer, because he had to get any alterations signed off by an electrical engineer, and Bill had signed off on the tricycle gear. And I mean, he was probably the first person in Australia to put tricycle gear on it.
And why was that?
I think he'd been flying with a friend who had a tail dragger. And they'd loop the loop sort of thing on landing, and I'd seen it, and I think he thought, I think I'd rather have a tricycle gear. He just thought it would be safer for him.
So that was not retractable?
No, and that did slow it down a little bit.
Yeah. So Barry takes it for the first flight, and what was his reaction?
Well, he came back and he said, "What have you done to that?" Well, apart from the fact that, he said the brakes aren't good enough, you need to get decent brakes. But he said, "What have you done with the radio?" because he said, that's the best handheld radio I've ever seen. And of course, Graham was a ham radio operator, so he knew about aerials, and of course he was also a physics teacher, and the aerial sort of went right back inside and all that sort of thing, and some person came along and was being very critical of, KRs, and Barry sort of said, well, I didn't think this would be any good, but it's taken both of us up there, and this was one of the criticisms of this fellow, you can't carry any weight. And he said, well, Graham and I have both been up in it, and he said, neither of us are very small people, and it's managed to carry us. And so I think Graham was about 10 feet tall at that point that Barry had stood up for his little plane.
Now, you mentioned earlier the Avalon Air Show. There's a story about Graham sharing a circuit with an F111 or something. What happened there?
Well, yeah, we had an interesting flight into Avalon. He decided we'd stayed the night at Ballarat because he wanted to be fresh going in there, and it was supposed to be a good day and everything. But we got up in the morning and there was fog everywhere. It was as thick as, but eventually we went out to the airport and somebody said, once you get up out of it, and it was starting to lift, it's clear all the way. And of course, going into Avalon, you have a time slot where you're supposed to be, and he had this time slot, and time was getting away, and anyway, we eventually took off, and when we got up and through this bit of fog that was still there, it wasn't particularly clear at all, and we'd ended up having to dart around showers and stuff, and so the stress levels were fairly high. And then he called in, you have to go out and circle around the prison. Where's that? So anyway, because the F111 was doing a practice run, and he was, as I say, he was also worrying at that stage about fuel because this flight was longer than we'd intended. Anyway, he saw another a little Piper Cub, and they were doing circuits, and we sort of followed them around, and once I realised that this guy could really fly, he said, I just tagged on behind him, and I felt safe, but I was really worried about that I might have to land on the road because they were holding us up so much. And then eventually and it's very interesting to see the F111 doing a practice run when you're up in the air, because they did a fuel dump and everything, and it was fascinating. But
I saw a photograph of Graham after that flight with the F111 crew. That must have been fun.
Oh, it was. To start with, after we had landed and parked the aeroplane, we're walking back, and this Air Force car came along, and Graham sort of said to them, do you know where we have to go? And then he realised, Air Force people, and he said, you're not one of the F111 pilot. He said, no, but the guys in the back are. Anyway, he met the guy from the Piper and said, thanked him very much for being such a reassuring person. And in one of those life's little coincidences, that F111 pilot was Craig Whiting, known as Fish, who comes from Caloundra and apparently lives down the street from me.
Now tell me, Sue, were there ever any scary incidents while you were flying together?
Yes. We had what we call our incident. We were flying out to Bangers, flying in out at Clifton. It was a farm fly-in that they had every year. And we were out near Gatton, and there was an almighty bang, and Graham very calmly said, "We've just lost the prop." Instant glider. You always wonder how well a plane will glide. Well, we found out the hard way that it glides very, very well. And at 5,000 feet, we saw this new bit of road that looked promising, so he did an absolutely perfect approach, and he called Mayday and all of that, and they were talking to him like 20 to the dozen, and in the end he just sort of said, "Look, I'll talk to you when I'm on the ground. I need to concentrate." And there was this new piece of road that, in one of life's coincidences, a friend of ours was actually the engineer on that particular part of the road. And he had to go around a big grader, but he did a perfect job.
And that was the Gatton bypass? That
was the Gatton bypass road, yes. And
so what happened to the prop?
Well, funnily, we thought, oh gee, I wonder what's happened to the prop. I hope it hasn't hurt anybody on the way, was our first thought. Well, my sister-in-law at the time was working for O, taking for the ambulance, and so I rang my brother and said, "Is Katie working today?" And he said yes. I said, "Well, could you ring her and just let her know that if anyone rings about a plane accident, we don't need an ambulance." What? And anyway, she rang me back a little bit later and said, "Don't do anything. Channel 9 are sending a helicopter." So we then had to, by this time, Frank had arrived with the trailer and we were starting to dismantle the wings and so forth to put it on the trailer. So then we had to sort of stop everything, and the next thing, this helicopter comes in. And so halfway through the interview with this Channel 9 reporter, these kids arrive with the prop. And they'd been herring around the farm in a ute, like country kids do, and saw something shiny and thought it might have been a newly born calf or something, and went over to investigate, and it was the prop. And so they arrived with this propeller, and it was just a great part of the story. In fact, a couple of years later, we were up here one day, and the helicopter pilot was now a pilot for the rescue chopper up here, and came over and saw us, and he said, when those kids arrived with the prop, the reporter was so excited he nearly wet himself. But it was a great part of that story, and apparently Channel 9, any of the channels, like a good news story on a Sunday night, and they'd had a couple of disasters, in previous years, so it was a good news story. And we even, in fact, I should have brought that out to show you, because we even made the front page of the Toowoomba Chronicle with, "Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's a miracle," or something like that.
And had the prop broken, or had it just come off?
No, the crankshaft broke. Okay. And when we'd bought another engine, because the original engine we had, and that's actually how the plane got the title of the beast, because sometimes it was a beast of a thing to start, because Graham had to hand prop the engine to start. So he thought, I'm getting a bit older, I'll upgrade the engine so that it's got an automatic starter motor. So, and when he bought this engine, he'd carefully looked at all the logbooks and everything, and we bought it from Port Macquarie from a really old guy, and that the bookwork was correct. What we found a few weeks later by somebody who came from Port Macquarie was that engine had a metal prop on the engine, and they'd had a prop strike on landing. and that would have started the circular crack, the fracture, and so we'd flown behind it for about 200 hours, and at that point.
Wonderful story. I think another memorable flight from our perspective was when he became a chase plane, a photographic chase plane for our Wirraway as it was coming in, being delivered here to Caloundra Airport for its final flight. And Graham took one of our volunteers with him up into the air with his camera, and they photographed the arrival of the Wirraway.
Yes, and I think he was tickled pink to do that. He had actually done a formation licence with Leicester and with our son Peter, who's also a pilot. And he said that was just a very special thing to do, but that was just so that he could do things like that, and we've got some lovely photos of the KR from the air.
Yeah, flying in formation. Yeah. Now, everyone who sees a photograph of Graham, particularly when he's in the cockpit, will notice the red hat. What's the story behind the red hat?
Well, before we ever got the plane going, he was up here, and Sports Aircraft had a little fly-in up here, and he became involved with that, and he just happened to have a red hat on that day, and a few people remarked on the fact that we couldn't actually see what you were doing, but we could see the red hat because he was helping park aircraft. Yeah, and he thought, well, that's a good idea, so he always wore a red hat, and red toweling hats were not terribly fashionable, and it became very difficult to buy a red toweling hat, so I ended up making the red hats, and I even made a number of either toweling or polar fleece hats.
As I understand it, the red hat is in the cockpit of the Beast as part of the display. If you come down to the Queensland Air Museum at Caloundra, the Rand Robinson is currently in Hangar 2. It's actually mounted up high above the facilities block, which seems a little ignominious. However, the reality is we don't have enough room here for all the displays that we already have, and so things get moved around. Some of them are hung off the rafters in the hangars as well. It is a shame in a way, isn't it, because it's a little bit hard to see up there, but it is on display permanently here. It's a lovely little airplane, and look, I think you and Graham donated it in 2013, and sadly that was also the year that you lost Graham. He stipulated that it not be flown, but that it be part of our display, and that's perfect because our aircraft don't fly. What was his connection with QAM before that? Why was it that he donated it here?
Well, he used to, as I say, he was president of Aero Club, and we had a monthly competition, and he got friendly with a couple of the guys from over here, although I don't think he ever volunteered over here. But he thought, and he used to ask if any of them wanted to come up and backseat on competition days, and a couple of the people did. But he felt that, well, he didn't want the plane to be sold because he didn't want if anything happened, he didn't want it coming back on me. And he was also of the opinion that it was now an experimental aircraft, and the basis of the experimental category was that it was done for people's learning and that sort of thing. And he just didn't want it flown, and he thought, well, it's part of the Caloundra history. It was based up here, parked on a trailer at the airfield that he made.
Well, as you say, it is a part of our local aviation history here. It's a lovely little addition to the collection, and a beautiful story about how it came to be here, and about how you and Graham were able to, enjoy so many times together in the air. Well, look, thank you so much for talking to us today, Sue. Thank you, and on your behalf, we are thankful to you and Graham for that story, but also for the donation to us, because this is the whole point of our museum, is to preserve Australia's aviation heritage, and this is a small but very important aspect of that. And it's been wonderful to hear some of those stories and to get to know Graham a little bit through your voice. Thank you for being here today.
That's my pleasure. Thank you, Gary.
What a delightful lady. Thanks very much to Sue for coming in and talking with us. That was a great story. So that's our episode. Don't forget, we're open from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. every day except Christmas Day and Easter Friday. We're at Pathfinder Drive, Caloundra, just across the road from the Caloundra Aerodrome, and we would love to see you. Come and visit us. Tell us you've heard the podcast so that we know that the people who are listening, maybe we can meet as well. We'll see you soon. Bye for now.